Hi everybody, so today I want to do a tutorial on high-speed sync, a little strobist tutorial. And what is high-speed sync, what it can do for you in your photography, and basically how it works, the positives and the negatives of using high-speed sync. So first of all, high-speed sync is a term used by Canon. Nikon calls it auto FP, and I believe it stands for auto focal plane, but they're exactly the same thing. What it means is it allows you to use a flash speed light with your photography and allows you to surpass your maximum flash sync speed. Now most DSLRs have a maximum flash sync speed of right around 1/200th or 1/250th of a second. So for example, if you are using just your pop-up flash on your DSLR and let's say you're in manual mode and you try to use your shutter, make it faster than 1/200th or 1/250th of a second, your camera won't allow you to do that because of that is the maximum flash sync speed. That is the fastest shutter that you can get where it will synchronize with your flash. Now, high-speed sync will allow you to surpass that ceiling of a maximum shutter. So to understand what high-speed sync is, first you need to understand how your shutter works. So I'm going to quickly show you how your shutter works, a little quick rundown of it. Okay, so here's what happens inside your camera when you click your shutter. So pretend this gray card right here is your sensor in your camera. Your sensor is what is recording the light that's coming through your lens, hitting your sensor, and bam, you have a picture. Okay, so what you do, what happens inside your camera is you have your shutter, and your shutter has two curtains. They call it the first curtain and your second curtain. Some people call it first curtain and rear curtain. They're basically the exact same thing. So what happens is the shutter covers your sensor from any light. So it can't record the image, or I can't record any light that's hitting your sensor. So the first curtain sits on top of your sensor, and then the second curtain is right behind it. So when you click your shutter, the first curtain rises, reveals the sensor, records the image, and then the second curtain covers back up, closes the image, and your exposure is done. And then the shutters, the first and second curtain reset again. Now, the time from when the first curtain opens and the second curtain closes is known as your shutter speed. So let's say you're shooting at 1/60th of a second, the first curtain opens, bam, 1/60th happens, second curtain closes, giving you an even exposure. So your maximum flash sync speed is the maximum time that the sensor is fully revealed before the second curtain starts to close. So if it's 1/250th of a second, the first curtain opens, and as soon as the first curtain is fully open and exposing the sensor, the second curtain already begins closing. So when you're using flash, think about it this way: when you're using flash, you take a picture, the sensor is fully open, the flash pops, bam, freezes whatever is going on in your image, and then the second curtain closes right behind it. Okay, so when you have shutter speeds faster than your maximum flash sync speed, what's happening is your sensor is actually never fully exposed at one time. So let's say you're using a 1/1000th of a second or anything faster than whatever your maximum flash sync speed is. So let's say it's 500th of a second. What's happened, let's say it's 500th of a second and you click the shutter, the first curtain is exposing the sensor, but when it gets to a certain point, the second curtain is right behind it, so your sensor is actually never fully exposed at one time, and then it resets. So if you're using flash, let's say you're using a really fast shutter speed at 1/1000th of a second, your sensor, the first curtain opens, second curtain follows right behind it, and then bam, the flash hits. It'll only expose this little part, this little sliver of your sensor, and then it travels through, then resets. That's why if you try to surpass your maximum flash sync speed, you'll see black bars in your image, because what's happening is when you're using shutter speeds faster than your max sync speed, your sensor is always, it's never fully exposed at one time. And even worse, if you're using, your fastest shutter speed, let's say your camera goes up to 1/8,000th of a second, then what's happening is there's only a little slit of your sensor being exposed to light while the curtains are traveling across your sensor. And if that's happening, here comes the slit, or the shutters, and then the light flashes. Then it's this little tiny sliver of light, that's all that is, that your sensor is being exposed to the flash. So that's why it's going to be a totally black image, essentially. When you use high-speed sync, what happens is it turns your flash into a strobe, and it pulses light really quickly. I forget how fast, but it's really, really fast. And it looks actually just like one flash, but essentially what's happening is your light is just popping off little bursts of light, pop, 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 pop. And it's giving your sensor an even exposure of flash all the way across as it travels through. Now, when it does that, it puts a little bit of a strain on your flash. That's why you lose a lot of power, or at least a stop and a half to 2 stops, I'm not exactly sure, of power from your flash when you use high-speed sync. So that is essentially what is happening with your shutter inside your camera. So actually, when I like to use high-speed sync the most is actually in the middle of the day, when I want to overpower the sun with my flash. So if you ever noticed, if you are out in the middle of the day, let's say the sun is at the highest point of the day in the sky, it's really bright, really harsh shadows. When you take a picture, let's say a portrait of someone, typically there'll be a shadow. It'll cast shadows underneath their eyes, underneath their chin, and then it'll be really hard light, which hard light isn't bad, but it's normally not considered flattering for portraits. So what I like to do is I like to use high-speed sync for a fill flash to fill in some of those shadows in people's faces. So because without high-speed sync, without a flash that's capable of high-speed sync, what happens is if you try to use your pop-up flash in that situation, it won't work, because your pop-up flash is limited to the maximum flash sync speed of your camera. So let's say you want to shoot at really wide apertures, let's say at 2.8, at f2, f1.8, even at f1.4, f1.2, whatever, just a really wide aperture. Well, to compensate for that aperture being so wide and letting in all that light, you're going to have to crank down your ISO. So let's say you have ISO down to 100, and the only other variable to limit the light would be your shutter speed. Well, in that situation, 1/200th or even 1/250th of a second isn't going to be fast enough to cut out all that light using your pop-up flash, because your pop-up flash will be limited to that speed. So that's when you need to use high-speed sync, and that'll allow you to overpower the sun, because essentially when you use high-speed sync, you really have a limitless shutter speed. You can go all the way up to 1/8,000th of a second using high-speed sync. Okay, here's an example of a setup shot I did yesterday using high-speed sync as a fill flash. I got my camera here, D7000, set up on a tripod. I'm using my hat as a subject and my speed light, an SB900, set to the right for high-speed sync. So I'll take a couple of pictures here to show you the difference between when I use it and when I'm not using it. Okay, so that's a really quick rundown of what high-speed sync is, and hopefully that helped you guys understand how you can use high-speed sync in your daily photography. I use it all the time, especially in really bright sunlight to fill in the shadows in people's faces. I like to use the sun as rim light for separation of the background, so your subject kind of pops out more. But when you do that, the subject is basically in silhouette, in shadow. So that's when I pop out my flash, fill the subject in with my flash. So then you can use that shallow depth of field, and it works really well. I use it all the time. People may look at you strange ones. Why are you pulling a flash out in the middle of the day? And there's plenty of light to work with. Well, that's because they might not know how to use high speed sync. Anyway, hope that helped, and I'll talk to you guys soon.